بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. رب زدني علما. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم علينا بالخير وبك نستعين. يا فتاح يا فتاح يا فتاح. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. Respected brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most kind, the most generous, the most merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to be here today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to be inside the masjid. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the tawfiq and the ability to perform Salat al-Asr with Jama'ah, alhamdulillah. So, as we all know, that alhamdulillah this whole week, and inshallah we continue to do so, that after Salat al-Asr we have the daily class, and every single class has a different theme to it. So today, inshallah, the theme on a Sunday is in regards to hadith and certain lessons and inspirations we can learn from the beloved words of our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So today's collection of hadith, and also all the brothers that have been following us for the past few months on the Sunday, the text that we go through is 40 ahadith compiled by Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. And we did go through roughly half of the ahadith, but alhamdulillah, as we have started with brothers in the physical presence, and due to request from some of the brothers, inshallah, that we will go from the beginning again. So for those brothers that were with us, this will be like the sort of muraja'ah. This will be a sort of muraja'ah and a sort of revision, and sort of a revision of what you have remembered, what you have learned, and what you've heard from before. And for the brothers that are new, inshallah, this will be something new for you. And if not new, if maybe something you have heard before, then inshallah it will revitalize your memory and reignite this maybe passion towards ahadith and towards learning the beloved saying of beloved Muslim Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So before I go to the hadith, I think it's very, very important to understand the scholar and understand the amazing individual who compiled this hadith. Because knowing and learning from and being inspired by the scholar himself, it can have an inspiration towards you in how is the proper method and how is the accurate way when it comes to acquiring knowledge. What is the best way that if we want to excel, if we want to be from amongst those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He has put the utul ilm, that He has put them in higher platform, that He has raised them. If you want to get to that level, and want to get to that level that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed those individuals, then we learn from those individuals that have already been there, have done that, and have acquired so much success to the extent that for many, many years and many, many centuries, their works are still being benefited from. So we learn about this hadith and about this scholar that has compiled this hadith. His name is, he was given the state status, and he was said is known to be Muhyiddin. He was known as the reviver of the religion. Then he had a kunya, by the kunya of Abu Zakaria. He was known as the father of Zakaria, but the amazing thing was he actually wasn't the father. And now that actually what we'll understand, and we'll go through very soon, that he actually never married. But yet Imam An-Nawawi rahmahullah ta'ala, who's this amazing scholar, he had this kind of opinion that people should try their best to have these kind of kunyas named by Abu Zakaria, even though they may not have any children. He was also, his actual name was Yahya ibn Sharaf, Yahya the son of Sharaf. And An-Nawawi is actually from where he is from in Damascus. His village name was An-Nawa. And again, what we know from many, many scholars, they had an attribution towards the area that they were from. So again, you have famous Imam Al-Bukhari, who's from Bukhara, based in Samarkand, nowadays known as Uzbekistan. So he's attributed towards where he was from and where he was born from. And this is like many other scholars, whether it be Tirmidhi, An-Naysaburi, As-Samarkandi. You have many, many scholars who are attributed towards the area that they are from. In regards to his family, his father, his grandfather, they're not really much known. But what's actually known in regards to an attribute about his father was that his father was known for really instilling and making sure that his family is very conscious about halal and haram. They're making sure that they are fully aware that anything that they are acquiring, either whether they're receiving or maybe something that they are consuming, is from a halal nature, is from a halal source, and making sure that they do not do anything, either doing anything or consume anything of a haram nature. This is something that was actually well known about his father. And this is actually something that we can see in the Ahadeethe that were compiled by Imam An-Nawawi. That one of the hadith he brings is in regards to making sure that everything that a Muslim acquires is tayyib. They're not just halal, but also wholesome and healthy for an individual. Inshallah, we'll get to the hadith. In regards to his excellence in when it came to his studies, we said even from a young age he excelled in his studies. That at a young age we know, and for many of you that have children, that one of the biggest interests of our children is sports. One of the biggest interests in our children are games, playing their PS4s or their PS5s, making sure that they when it comes to telling them to read half an hour or 4 hours, we find it can be often quite difficult for them. But for them playing half an hour of games, it's very, very easy to the extent they'll play 4 hours, 5 hours of games. But Imam An-Nawawi rahmahullah ta'ala was totally different. He wasn't like the average child. To the extent it was actually mentioned that he was so interested in learning the Quran that he memorized the Quran at a young age. And there was actually an incident that when he was at a young age, the children forced him to play with them. The children forced him to play with them. And what was his reaction to that? He actually started to cry. He started to cry because he did not want to play sports with them. He wasn't attracted to playing sports with them. And so for that reason, he actually started to cry because he realized that this was actually time wasted, that he wanted to memorize the Quran and he wanted to memorize the Ahadeethe and the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. And by playing sports, he's going to be distracted. And what we see further on, that we generally see that he excelled in 3 areas. Number 1 was his austerity, another one was his knowledge, another one was his ability when it came to him being vocal in seeing things that are going wrong, that he would be vocal against it and he would actually challenge the kings and the sultan at the time. So looking at his knowledge and his acquiring of knowledge, we find that it was described that in the area that he was studying, and in the area that was said, there was literally no space. That every single area there was just books and books and books compiled. Books on top of one another, books on top of one another. And at one time, you would attend at least 12 lectures a day. 12 lectures a day. And so roughly we would say that each lecture was about 1 hour. Imagine half of his day was going in just attending lectures of various scholars and various teachers. Some may even think to themselves that, how is this even possible? If he's spending 12 hours on lectures and 12 hours on studies, then where does he get the time to perform his prayers? Where does he get the time to sleep? Where does he get the time to eat and drink? Where does he get the time to take care of himself? The reality is, my dear respected brothers, is when there is a will, there is a way. When you have that determination, when you have that sincerity and you have that sincere intention within your heart, then indeed anything is possible. And we find this from this great Imam. That 12 hours a day just spending behind lectures. They're just in lectures. Imagine the extra study that you have to do ahead of that. He's also said that he would not sleep until sleep would overtake him. Roughly a lot of us, we have our own scheduled time of sleeping, half 11, half 12. For him, there was no such thing. Only when sleep would overtake him. So that would mean that he would be studying, and sometimes, he would fall on sleep on top of his books. And it was actually said that he had no area of sleep. So the reality was, his sleep was either in a sitting position or his pillow were his books. There was no blanket. And he would be in these conditions whilst he was studying. He even said to himself that I spent 2 years, 2 years that lying on the ground to sleep on side. And even when he was on the streets, and even when he was on the streets, often what kind of habits do we have on the streets? Sometimes we may be on our phone or looking around, window shopping, talking to people, engaged in dunya. But what was he doing when he was on the street? Again, just looking over his notes, revising his notes. Whatever his teachers had, maybe told him in his lectures, whatever he had written down, memorizing them, pondering over them, thinking, deep thinking, being conscious of the knowledge that he has attained, that how can he bring this into his life and how he can practice on the knowledge that he's learned. Then in regards to something again that's very known of him is austerity. Now austerity means it's kind of abstinence from the dunya and abstinence from the materialistic things in the dunya. So he said his actual physical description that he only ever had a gown and he had one long turban. So just a gown and one long turban. And there was at one time in his life that we only ever eat food that his father had sent him. Because of the value his father had instilled within him about halal and haram, he was so conscious about eating anything that he should not have ate. So for that reason, because he had that consciousness, only whatever his father had sent him, he'd actually eat from that. And then something that was actually common at the time was people eating from the fruits of Damascus. But even that he abstained from because he certainly believed that some of these fruits, they were only grown for those orphans that were there at that time. And so because, again, he was very doubtful of that nature of whether he could consume those fruits or not, he stayed away from it. There was another time when it came to the day of Eid, subhanAllah. We know the day of Eid, we know the kind of food that we have on the day of Eid. We have many, many dishes and many, many side dishes and many, many desserts. On the day of Eid, the Imam himself is eating from a broth that has no meat inside it. And so the Sultan, the Chief Justice, he sees him, and the Imam invites him to come eat with me. What does he do? He sees that there's no meat inside his food, and so he politely refuses that. Okay. Later on, what happens? This Chief Justice, he makes sure that he cooks a good wholesome meal which had a lot of meat inside it, and he invites the Imam to come and join him. The Imam says, "No, I do not want to eat from this food because why?" He says, "Sometimes this is the food of the tyrants. This is the food of the oppressors." And because of his dislike of engaging in things that maybe tyrants would do, he actually stayed away from eating such good food at that time. So another level example of his austerity at that time. So what we can say is the only kind of material possession that he had was his actual books. And even any money that he would receive, any stipends that he would receive, would just go on to books and books. Another thing in regards to him as a teacher, he was so modest that he would actually never accept any khidmah. He would actually never accept any kind of service from his students. Often, when you have teachers, a lot of people are trying their best to, whether it may be even just pouring some water into a glass for the teacher to drink, or serving the teacher with some clothes, or massaging the teacher, or making sure the teacher is well fed. He wouldn't accept any of this from his students. And not only that, he would be the one that would serve his students even until such an old age. Another thing that we see, which we mentioned previously, is that he was from one of these scholars that we say, the ulama al-Uzzad, that the bachelor scholars, those that never actually married. And people gave many reasons as to why he didn't marry. One individual, one kind of reasoning for this was due to his austerity, due to his absence of the dunya. Because he was such a person that he felt that all of this is through the temptation of this dunya, and that because if he felt to himself that he would be distracted, that was one of the reasons he didn't get married. Another reasoning was that he never had the means, the financial means to get married. But this is a very far-fetched reasoning because if he wanted to, he could have. But one of the most simple reasons is that sometimes marriage is a different level and has a different ruling to certain individuals. Just in general, it is a sunnah mu'akkala, a very emphasized sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as he says, "Al-nikah min sunnati," the nikah, and marriage is my tradition. That's general, but sometimes it can actually be obligatory on certain individuals. When can this be the case for certain individuals? That should they not get married, they would engage in haram, and they would engage in things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want them to engage in. But for some individuals, it is slightly disliked. And that is for certain individuals, if they were to get married, they will not be able to take care of the individuals Allah Azza wa Jal has put them responsible for. And this is probably one of the reasons that he felt to himself that maybe he could not take care of his wife, or a wife, a woman, as he should ought to. And for that reason, he decided not to get married. And he actually mentions a few little footnotes whenever he mentions in regards to a hadith in regards to marriage. That this is one thing that we have to be very, very careful of, is making sure that we are taking care of our spouses, because كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. every single one of you is responsible, is a shepherd, and every single shepherd is responsible over his flock. And make sure that be aware that Allah Azza wa Jal is going to question you on those individuals that you are responsible over. And the last thing that we mentioned is something that again he was very known for was how outspoken he was, that if he saw something wrong happening, he would make sure that he speaks out against it. So one thing, for example, something that was happening at the time, because he was living at this era where the Mongols were at war against the Muslims. And something that what happened at the time was, and many of the brothers would know that when a war takes place, there's a lot of corruption. The city is now in turmoil. The city is in a lot of financial difficulty, especially on the inhabitants, people that are living in a lot of difficulty now. And the Sultan at the time, the king at the time, he had really raised the taxes. And the Imam felt at the time that this was very burdensome among the people, that he cannot do something of this nature. The people are already suffering, people are already at a very low stage, very low financial point. How can he possibly raising the taxes? So he spoke out against the Sultan. And the Sultan didn't like it, but he had to. Imam felt it was his responsibility that for the sake of the people that are living at the time, for the sake of the welfare of the people, no, lessen the taxes and make sure it's as less as possible. Another incident in regards to this was when, again, in regards to the Mongols, that when the Mongols had taken over certain lands from the individuals, when those same lands were retaken from the Mongols, there were certain people that wanted the land that was taken from them. But the Sultan at the time, he appointed a fatwa, and unfortunately, there were also other scholars that were living at the time, and certain times they would sign certain letters and sign off certain agreements and fatwas just for appeasing the Imam, appeasing the Sultan at the time. The Imam, he was totally against this. That there are people, their land belongs to them, and unfortunately it was seized from them. Maybe they don't have any documentation, but they truly believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would not lie, that give their land that belongs to them. Again, he sees it as a responsibility. And because of this, because of how outspoken he was actually exiled from the area that he was. And again, what was the actual cutoff point was when, again, the Sultan who was there at the time, because these were different Sultans that were rulers and leaders, he actually, again, took fatwa from different Imams at the time that to take some money from the citizenry, which is like a Baytul Mal, that he could take some money from the Baytul Mal and use this to attack the Mongols even more, to crush them, and to make them as small as possible. The Imam said to the king and the Sultan at the time, I believe that you have many slave men and slave women at that time. Slave men and women at the time were like a commodity. And you have many horses, and you have many gold and silver. That if you have these, then I'm not going to sign the fatwa at that time. I'm not going to sign it. Your intention may be good, to take some money and attack the Mongols, but you're an individual that is already very, very wealthy. And you already have a lot of wealth by your side. And so if you continue to hold all this wealth by your side, of course I'm not going to sign this fatwa, because I see this as a wrong. But a king, he is the one that needs to initiate, spending from his own money, his own wealth, and he has enough wealth to distribute it to attack the Mongols, whoever was there at the time. So again, a lesson for us all, that often, sometimes, with wisdom, with hikmah, that whenever it's time to be and to speak out against something wrong that you see, using the right wisdom, speak out, like the Imam has taught us, like the Imam did Aysan, but without fearing any consequences. So these are certain lessons that we learn from the Imam's life, something that I really wish to pass on, because knowledge nowadays is very, very, unfortunately, people will think they have done little research because maybe they've read from some forums. I've read from a forum, I've read from Islamic QA, and I've done my research. But when we look at the studying nature of our Imam, we know that we are far from this. And if we ever want to really excel, and we really want to allow this knowledge to benefit, have to read many, many biographies of these Imams, to allow their learning natures and methods, and bring it into your own life. And inshallah, you'll see a lot of benefit. So before we move on to hadith number 1, I'll move on to his introduction of what was his thought process and what was his attitude before he was actually compiled this. What motivated him to actually compile a book of 40 hadith. So he initiates his introduction with a khutbah, as is very, very important. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, كُلُّ أَمْرٍ ذِي بَالٍ لم يبدأ فيه بالحمد فهو أبطأ. Any very important matter which is not started off with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that work is incomplete, or that work is cut off blessings. And that's why we see many scholars, even when it comes to the Jumu'ah, the general lessons or general khutbahs, you always start off with praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he thanks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in abundance, then he sends salutations from the final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whose words he will benefit others from, and whose words and we will benefit from. Then he mentions, فَقَدْ رَوَيْنَا عَنْ عَلِي بْنِ أَبِي طَالِبٍ وعبد الله بن مسعود ومعاذ بن جبل وابي الدرداء وابن عمر وابن عباس وانس بن مالك وابي هريره وابي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنهم من طرق كثيرات بروايه متنوعه. That he mentions from many narrators from different turuqs and different narrations. What was the hadith that he mentions? The Prophet ﷺ says, من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا من أمر دينها بعثه الله يوم القيامة في زمرة الفقهاء والعلماء. Whoever from my ummah memorizes 40 ahadith from the affairs of his religion, from the affairs of Al-Islam, whoever memorizes 40 hadith, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise him on the day of judgment in the company of the fuqaha, of the theologians, and in the company of the ulama. Then he mentions in the riwayah of Abu Darda, that it is when the Prophet mentions whoever learns 40 hadith, وَكُنْتُ لَهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ شَافِعًا, that I will be an intercessor for him on the day of judgment. Another riwayah says that it will be said to him, أُدْخُلْ مِنْ أَيِّ أَبْوَابِ الْجَنَّةِ شِئْتَ, enter from whichever door and gate of Jannah you wish to enter from. And another riwayah of Ibn Umar says that whoever memorizes 40 hadith, كُتِبَ فِي زُمَّةِ الْعُلَمَاءِ وَحُشِرَ فِي زُمَّةِ الشُّهَدَاءِ, and he will be raised up in the company of the martyrs. Then the Imam, he mentions that although there are this hadith comes from many different different turuq and many different narrations, but the grading of this hadith is of a weak nature. The grading of this hadith is of a weak nature, but he says that the ulama, they have unanimously agreed on citing virtues and narrating a hadith of a weak nature when it comes to virtuous actions. When it comes to encouraging brothers to do certain good actions, then you can narrate a hadith of a weak nature. Only when it comes to masail of halal and haram, anything in regards to halal and haram, the hadith backed up for those actions need to be on an authentic level. But when it comes to just virtuous action, maybe reciting Quran or maybe certain adhkar, if they are of the weak nature, then you are permitted to act upon them, provided you don't solely believe that this was something wholly from the Prophet ﷺ. Because of its weak nature, there is a possibility that it's not from the Prophet ﷺ. However, then the Imam he mentions, but I did not solely rely on this hadith, but he relied upon other hadith. For example, a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he mentions, يُبَلِّغُ الشَّاهِدْ مِنْكُمُ الْغَائِبِ, that when the Prophet ﷺ mentions in his Hajjatul Wida, in his final Hajj, the one and only Hajj, that whoever is present from amongst you today, make sure you do tabligh, and make sure you propagate knowledge to those people who are not present. And another hadith which is very important, this is something that we can definitely inspire us to learn the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he mentions, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the face of the person shine, who سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي, who hears my sayings, فَوَعَاهَا, and he memorizes them, فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ, and he acts upon them in the way that he heard them. What he heard, he acts upon his ahadith. So he says, what he says after this is, there were many ulama that compiled 40 ahadith. Some compiled ahadith in regards to khutbah, some regard ahadith in regards to zuhud, وبعضهم في الجهاد, some in regards to fighting, some in regards to adab, etiquette. And each of them were very good purposes behind the compilation of these 40 ahadith. But then he says, وَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ جَمْعَ أَرْبَعِينَ أَهَمَّ مِنْ هَذِهِ كُلِّهِ, that I thought to myself that to compile 40 hadith is even more important than all of these ulama that have compiled their own 40 hadith. And something that is comprising of everything. And he says that every single hadith from the 40 that is collected is a qa'ida, a very important principle from the principles of the religion. And when we look at it, that's why we can probably come to the conclusion why his 40 hadith was much more notable and why his 40 hadith is more known very, very commonly, and to the extent that whatever bookshop that you may go to, whatever bookstore or library that you may go to, you will find, even if it's a very small Islamic bookstore, you will find the Imam's 40 hadith book within the shelves of these bookstores. And then what he says after this, he says, I have mentioned these ahadith by cutting off the chain of narration. Why does he mention it? This is something that I also want the brothers to, inshallah, do is, the reason he cut off the chain of narration, so its memorization can be very, very easy. And therefore, taking benefit from them can be very, very general and very, very easy for every single person. So this is my advice, inshallah, to all of the brothers, that every hadith that we do week by week, inshallah, you have a whole week to try your best to memorize the hadith. And when you have memorized that, inshallah, we are available to listen to it. And whoever has, inshallah, whoever has done all 40 hadith, we'll try to make sure that we speak to the trustees of the masjid to give you a gift, inshallah. No gift will ever, no sort of gift will ever match the effort that you have done in learning the hadith, because inshallah on the day of judgment, that will be the greatest reward for you. But inshallah, we can sort out some benefit for you in this one, inshallah, something that could at least show our appreciation of your efforts in learning these hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But he says, وَيَنْبَغِي لِكُلِّ رَاغِبٍ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَنْ يَعْرَفَ هَذِهِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. It is very, very important for every single individual that has inclination towards the akhirah to learn and to realize and acknowledge the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we will end on the introduction today, inshallah. And from next week, we will start off with the ahadith, the one ahadith, that every single hadith, muhaddith, mentioned in the book, the chapter, and the hadith of intention, inshallah. So we'll keep it for today. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us this appreciation of knowledge. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to understand and to take lessons from the life of this blessed Imam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that upon studying and acquiring knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us all Jannatul Firdaus. Do you have any questions before we finish up the wrap up? So no questions, Jazakumullah khair, brothers, inshallah. There will be continuous lessons from tomorrow throughout the week, inshallah. You join us to benefit. Also, tell your other extended family and friends, inshallah, about these lessons. And whoever can't join us, tell them about our YouTube channel, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Wa ahsanul jazaa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
شكرا جزاك الله.